Glenn, every pilot keeps a logbook. We've been doing a number of interviews and we've talked about logbooks, but we haven't had the chance to see a logbook. I wonder if you'd show us your logbook.
Yes, this is the first logbook covering my first 15 years of flying. It's been bound several times, so the original color probably doesn't represent the color that it was given to me. And you can see it's getting pretty yellow around the edges, I guess. But this is the logbook that's kept on a monthly basis by every pilot that flies military aircraft, both in the Royal Canadian Navy and in the Royal Canadian Air Force. My finest aviation memory was in the summer of 1963 when I was on task when we surfaced a Soviet submarine, and it was my aircraft that surfaced it. And I took the pictures of it and sent the American statement that we are United States Navy aircraft, so and so and so forth. Can we be of assistance? There are several categories of test flying. Now, the test flying, the research test flying is the kind of test flying that they do in the X-15 kind of thing down the States at Edwards Air Force Base. And that's primarily test flying that's determining how you manage airflows at very, very high speeds and so on and so forth. The next level down is flight test, which is dealing primarily with ensuring that the contractor's aircraft that has been contracted for by the United States Navy or anybody meets the engineering specifications that were specified originally. And the next one down would be weapons test, which is the separation of weapons from both new and existing aircraft in the Canadian Forces inventory. The next one would be service test, which is to determine how quickly you can service the aircraft, for instance, on a flight deck of a carrier or on the tarmac. And the last one probably would be acceptance test, which is accepting the production aircraft that come off the assembly line after all of the preceding have been done. Myself, I only flew weapons test, maintenance test, and systems test. But essentially, each one has its own unique category. Now, in the Canadian Forces, we don't get new aircraft all that often, so flight test tends to be subordinate to systems test, where the systems are changed periodically every 7 or 8 years as the aircraft proceeds through its structural life. We were doing trials up at Primrose Lake, and we had a tracker and a Sea King up there to do the trials. But we weren't getting enough time, and November was approaching when ice freeze-up would occur. We could not do it with the Primrose Lake frozen. So I had called my commanding officer back at Shearwater, and I said, we've got a problem here, and unless we finish, we cannot conclude this trial before winter. And that means we have to drag this thing out until next year. So I flew the T-33 back down to Shearwater, and we talked about it and finally agreed that there would be some pressure to give us more time on the phototheodolite range so we could finish this trial. And I made an appointment for Saturday morning takeoff in the T-33 to fly back out to Coal Lake. And I stopped off in North Bay and refueled, tanked up, and got to Winnipeg. And by this time, it was starting to get dark on the Saturday evening. It was late October, and it was fairly cool. And I climbed out, climbed into the airplane, and took off and started to head for Coal Lake, actually via Saskatoon. And by golly, no sooner had I got to 35,000 feet than I felt a little chilly. So I turned on the cockpit heaters and bumped up the main heat a little bit, and the canopy defrosters were on, and it was nighttime by this time, so I turned on the running lights and so on and so forth. And about 4 seconds later, the world exploded on me as I had an explosive decompression in the canopy. And normally in a T-33, while you're flying at 35,000 feet, the cockpit is pressurized, so you're really only at 15,000 feet from a pressure point of view. And when this canopy shattered, all of the air on the inside went to the outside. You've probably seen some stories about commercial airliners that had this happen. And even though I was strapped in with a 4-point harness, my head smashed against the top of the canopy. Now, I couldn't see this, of course it was dark, but what had actually happened was a crack had occurred about 8 inches behind my head. And the canopy had shattered in such a way so that one side went to the right and the other side went to the left, and I had this small tornado, 410 knots at minus 65 degrees centigrade coming in, so it was a fairly interesting time. And the problem basically was that, well, it didn't really, I knew pretty soon what had happened. I wasn't sure where it had happened. But the problem that I had was that the antenna for my navigation system ran down the center of the top of the canopy, which you can see behind. And because that sheared, I had no navigation system. Now, we had in those days what was called an air direction finder. It's nothing more than a needle on the compass that points in the direction of the emitting signal. And the needle was going around in meaningless circles, which tells me that I'm not in very good shape. And I'm not going to go to Cold Lake because if I don't know where Cold Lake is, I might have to eject. And that wasn't very exciting at the end of October, because if I broke an ankle or somehow got injured, on an ejection, I could be out in some place that just didn't have any lights or farmland around. So I decided that I would descend through the cloud, and I was on pressure breathing. There's a system in this particular aircraft that prevents you from talking if your cockpit depressurizes. Every time you try to talk, it forces more air into your lungs, so that you don't suffer from hypoxia. Now, this particular feature of the oxygen system really stops about 28 or 27,000 feet, and so I immediately let down into cloud. And fortunately for me, I saw the lights of Saskatoon at about 10,000 feet. I'd been into Saskatoon, had flown in there about, I guess, probably a couple of weeks before, and I knew that the airport was at the northwest of the city. And I subsequently landed, and without a ladder, I had to fall down, and I almost broke my ankle there, but that was another story. Flying this airplane is really quite a docile thing, and it's quite enjoyable. It's just, you have to get your mind wrapped around the scale of thinking and the speed.